The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to Coleman Report Live. I'm Bob Coleman. We're talking Main Street and the small business lenders who help it grow. Lance Sexton, John Riosty, Delaney's on the wing. We got a lot of stuff to cover. John, welcome. There's a certificate. Tell you what, let's have John do his reporting first, and then we'll go to, we're going to be talking about state small business lending programs. But John, you had a fascinating article on last week on Live Oak Bank. Tell us about it.
Well, it wasn't sort of a lot of reporting. I listened to the earnings conference call that they have every quarter when they report their earnings, and the CEO, Chip Mann, said that he had, not he personally, but that the bank had sent emails to 700 bankers at 85 banks, and they were going to follow up with additional emails to an undetermined number of bankers at 25 other banks. So a total of 110 banks and 700 plus bankers gauging their interest in coming to work for Live Oak. And what I thought was a great quote, he said, if you're an SBA lender, there's a 100% chance you've heard of Live Oak, which I think
yeah, that's right. That's right.
is accurate. And some of what you heard, there's a good chance that some of what you heard might be positive.
I like
it's the message, and it's his quote, not mine. And I thought that was very interesting because while I know that any number of lenders, not just banks, but the non-bank lenders and the credit unions as well, are expanding their SBA programs. But it seemed to me that no one had that kind of ambition to add, hundreds of lenders. He said that they have 168 people who have responded with some degree of interest.
Wow.
Whether it's just, a polite response to the initial inquiry, or whether it's, a more serious level of interest. That he didn't delineate into that, break down the 168. But
wow.
I was able to talk
probably
to.
should have asked him how many of those hit spam, but you probably don't want to go through.
Well, obviously, if you do the math, the big majority, 500 plus, at least initially, didn't express so much interest. But
Lance, your boss was also mentioned in there. Have you read the article, or should we let John talk about what Chris said?
Just share. I didn't get a chance.
John. And Chris Hearn, you also quoted him. What did he say?
He said two very interesting things. One, he said that Live Oak's timing is very good. That with the economy beginning to slow down and sputter, this is the time when bankers will take what previously would have been conventional deals and funnel them through SBA.
Absolutely.
So he said, there's that on the horizon. And Live Oak also said that they have the biggest pipeline in their history to begin with, but they can see that there's the opportunity to get even more. So he said that from a timing standpoint, Live Oak is right on the money. I think the phrase he used, if I can remember, is that Chip Mann can read the tea leaves.
Tea leaves, very good.
Well, yeah, and one thing the Great Recession that we experienced back in 08, 09, I was working at SBA at that time. And I know the numbers are hard to compare to the numbers today, but SBA, the desire for SBA financing was very robust. Banks were not making commercial loans, but they were making SBA loans, and the same thing's going to happen now. You're going to see your regular commercial loans get a little more difficult to get, but they're going to funnel more and more projects toward the SBA lending program. So it is appropriate timing.
And I don't see, I'll ask both of your opinions, I don't see rising interest rates being a slowing factor on demand. Money is a cost of doing business, but people still need capital. Lance, what's your opinion?
As a former small business owner and borrower, the interest rate was important to me, but it was not nearly as important as the payment amount, the monthly payment amount. Cash flow for a small business is a lot more important than what the interest rate is. The other thing is timeliness. Any small business owner will tell you, and this is a good thing for every SBA lender to hear. When I was a small business owner and I needed financing, it was more important for me to get a quick yes or a quick no than to be drug out for months and get an answer. I mean, efficiency in processing the loan was a critical element in who I used as my bank.
Yeah, because if you don't have cash in the bank, that can put you out of business. A high interest rate immediately.
Guys, and that's why so many small businesses fall into the trap of using, and forgive me, fintechs.
I said it,
but that's why so many small businesses fall into this. I don't mind paying 22.9% if I can have my money by tomorrow morning.
Right.
Right.
And you're being generous on that rate.
I was trying to be. I was going to say something negative, but I wanted to have something positive to go along with it.
Go ahead, John.
I just wanted to mention one other thing. There may not be another SBA lender right now who's looking to hire at the level that Live Oak is, but the industry and the aggregate. For instance, one of the people I talked to was the CEO at Gulf Coast Small Business Lending, and they're based in Dallas, but the bank is based in New Orleans. So it's an interesting dichotomy. But they're not as big as Live Oak, so they're not going to try to hire 168 people. But for their size, they're expanding by 50%, which is substantial. And when you take that in the aggregate, the industry in the aggregate, not just one player that's going head to head in terms of hiring, I think it adds up to what Live Oak is doing. So I think the takeaway for me is that there's a lot of competition for hiring and a lot of desire to expand industry.
John, when you say 168 lenders, are you talking about business development officers or all staffing positions?
Development officers. He was talking. It seemed to me from the context that he wants lenders. He obviously probably wants the support staff as well, but he wants lenders. They see tremendous opportunity. And one other quick takeaway there: they had a big gain on sale from one of their venture investments. I think that news had been reported earlier, but they got the money at the end of this quarter, so it was on the second quarter report. So they need to hire.
Being an incredibly old, gray-headed SBA lender, John's article tells us all something very important. Your good people, protect them. Don't make, the most, I can't tell you guys how many times this has happened. Great opportunity comes along. I decide that's what I want to take. I go back to my current employer and give them the, mandatory 2-week notice. And then they come back and say, oh, well, we'll pay you this.
Right.
Well, the point of this story, Live Oak is aggressively pursuing people. Gulf Coast is aggressively pursuing people. Take care of your quality people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Don't make them give you a resignation letter, I'm going somewhere else, before you decide you're going to take appropriate care of.
All right. Well, we will send Chip a invoice for our 10-minute Live Oak infomercial. John, you mentioned that you were very interested in this hearing last week. I know Delaney's covered it as well. Were you able to follow up with the Senate hearing?
I am working on that now. I unfortunately last week was the height of earnings, so I did quite a few earnings reports, and I hadn't dig in on that as much as I had anticipated. I was pulled into it.
But Delaney talked about this earlier. Delaney, are you sitting there ready to jump in?
Yes, I sure am.
There you are. Real quick question. What the hearing was about is, should we loosen the criminal background checks eligibility for SBA lending? And Delaney, I guess the one question I have for you is this a bipartisan effort? Do you see both sides of the aisle wanting to address this issue?
I mean, I believe so.
I agree. I think
Yeah.
it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It cuts across both aisles.
All right, very good. Great. Let's get into, let's shift gears. Thanks, John. I really appreciate you following up on that. I want to talk about the state lending programs. Delaney, set us up on this. How many states have separate lending programs for small business lending? What have you found out?
It appears that most, if not all, states have some kind of small business lending program, though they often tend to be smaller dollar loans and for startups.
And the poll question is, does your state have a separate one that you know about?
I'm going to be surprised if the numbers are not real high.
Also,
here.
I should, and also city. There's a lot of cities. City of LA, City
Absolutely.
of Albuquerque, a lot of Chicago. A lot of cities are also doing that. About half. I think it's higher than that, but half of the people know about that. And we're bringing that up because that is another availability for niche lending. California has a great program specifically geared for truckers to, now I'm getting myself in trouble, basically go green. They can get the loan to make their truck more environmental friendly, and it's a fully guaranteed program.
Most states, Bob, that I've had the pleasure to work in have an economic development agency, and most of those economic development agencies have some sort of lending program. And my understanding is, in just the state I'm in, they had a lot of excess funds this year, and they did drive some of those back into the economic development program, which in turn beefed up their local lending.
Second question. Does your state have a quasi CFPB, Consumer Finance Protection Board? We'll have to work on Michael's spelling. But what I want to know is do they have are you under state regulations? I guess we're tying in the third poll, Michael. That's what this is. Are you concerned about what your local state is? California, obviously, that's a huge concern right now. John, does that surprise you?
No, what I'll be interested in is to see the numbers a year or two down the road, because
Yes.
What California does, it just seems a lot of states eventually fall in line with that. California is always in front, and
Well, which is interesting because California was really the leader in changing auto emission standards. They set the standard, and then because of the size of the state, automakers followed. What California, this own economy, would be the 6th largest in the world. So for them to come out and say we're going to have a state program that monitors small business lending activities, they do consumer, but now they're getting into small lending. That's going to affect anybody who makes a loan in California. Third poll question, Michael. Is your institution governed by state regulators? I do not mean if you're a state bank. What I want to know is if you're an FDIC, credit union, federally chartered, but are your state regulators also poking around in what you do? John, do you see this as becoming more and more of an issue?
no, actually, I see it as it seems to me there's an interesting trend going on. The regulators work with each other. The regulators, a lot of times it's the FDIC or the government doing the training, or at least they're sending their people to the same training that the state regulators are going into. And I think there's more cooperation. I think that a lot of times what I've been hearing is that they're trying at least to schedule the examinations, at the same time, so that the banks are not being hit over and over and over again, so that it's as efficient, the process is as efficient as possible. And I'm hoping that it's, that trend is accelerating.
John, before COVID hit, it was announced SBA was going to be working more closely with FDIC on reviews. I haven't heard too much about that. Lance or John, have you heard about where we are on that, or did PPP pretty well suck the oxygen out of a lot of SBA initiatives?
I think you put a pause on it.
Yes, I was going to say too. They're pulled in a lot of directions.
Hey, John, I'm just curious. Is there a trend for banks to move under state regulation versus federal? Because I've seen quite a few do that.
Yeah, interesting. Good question.
I think so. And also, I think if you look at the de novo banks, the trend is to for a state charter as opposed to a national charter. But I think a lot of the biggest banks still have national charters, and some of the state banks that have national lending aspirations will have a national a charter. But I should have said some of the smaller banks that have national lending aspirations. But I think you're exactly right. The majority, the vast majority of institutions have state charters.
Next question, Michael. I think we got 5 today.
Wow.
Are you aware of the CFPB Small Business Plan, Consumer Finance Protection Board? John, I'm going to ask you first. I know they're constantly talking about this, but how set in stone is it? And do you know where we are on the timeline on implementation?
I don't know about implementation, but I think it is definitely going to go forward.
And real quickly, and basically what it is in a nutshell, correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, is what we are required to do on consumer lending reporting. We will also be required on small business lending reporting. Is that it in a nutshell?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. There's going to be a reporting requirement, a small business reporting requirement.
Well, and I think what it will do, guys, is it will build some protections in for small business borrowers that have not been there in the past.
Last question. Do you utilize a state or city small business fund? Does your institution do that? One-third. And Lance, I would say that is a niche that you should look into wherever you are.
Oh, absolutely. It's something that you should check into for your financial institution.
Yeah, because there's a lot of niches. I know there's one bank in Southern California that, as I said, specializes in trucks. And there's what, $25,000, $50,000 loans that are guaranteed, and it's a profitable niche for that. Lance, real quick, what are we talking about on Wednesday?
Well, there was a new release from SBA. There is some interesting information in the deregulatory rule. There's some things as an SBA lender that you'll want to be aware of. Probably the most prevalent one, Bob, is the change in the interest rates that we can charge on the SBA loan. So we're going to cover all the proposed changes. Some were proposed and didn't pass. But there were many changes, and like I said, one of the most significant ones was the change in the interest.
And that rule is effective today.
It's effective it currently is effective, absolutely.
So we're going to be talking about. Hey, John, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. Lance, as always. Lance, I'll see you Wednesday. Everyone have a nice week. And thank you for joining us for Coleman Report Live and for supporting America's Main Street, one entrepreneur at a time.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.